Welcome to Planning and Beyond, the podcast where financial planning meets human understanding. I'm your host, Ashley Kwame, and today I'm joined by Rose Seelan, who is a CFP, in addition to also being a certified financial transitionist. And probably the coolest part, maybe not the coolest part of Rose, I don't know. I don't want to say, she is a death doula. Now, if you're hearing that right now and you're like, what? Please know that that was also my reaction. A death doula? Like, I didn't even know that that was such a thing. And so I'm here to tell you that one, it is a thing, and that Rose is doing it in addition to also working and being a financial planner, and has found a beautiful, lovely way to kind of bring a lot of this together. And so I'm not going to spoil things, but Rose is here to really share a little bit more about what we're going to be talking about, which is really supporting clients who are in acute crisis. And so that could be death. It could also be some sort of medical ailment, diagnosis, or what have you. But crisis is a little subjective here. But Rose is here to share with us some really amazing wisdom, little nuggets all around how you as an advisor can support your clients who are going through a crisis. Rose, thank you so much. Welcome to the show. I'm so grateful that you're here.
Thank you, Ashley. I'm so honored to be here with you. Thank you.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, would you be willing to maybe just share a little bit about your story? These certifications, like, they sound cool. I think two of them advisors are probably pretty familiar with. But I'd love to just hear a little bit of your backstory and how that then culminated in becoming a death doula.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I've been in finance for about 12 years now. Started out in property and casualty. I was an advisor with a major broker dealer. Then I moved to the independent space for a couple of years. And I am just this coming Sunday, actually, the January 25th. I don't know when this podcast will air, but January
A little bit
25th.
later than
Yeah,
January 25th.
Yeah, I'm officially launching my own RIA, which is called Golden Thread Collaborative. And I'm really excited about the date of the launching. And I mention it specifically regardless of when this is dropping, because it would have been my dad's 65th birthday. And my dad's life and death is really the major thrust behind me doing what I'm doing right now. So it's a pretty key part of the backstory. Going along in finance, like we do, we kind of find ourselves here. We're building careers. We're doing what we do. And then my dad died in March of 2022, just a few weeks before his 61st birthday. So it was a death too soon. He was too young, and kind of saw it coming, but it was also pretty quick. And in the process of that, and I guess another important part to share is that 20 something years ago, through college and a little while after, I had been a birth doula. So I had supported many people through the labor and delivery process, and seen lots of babies and come into the world, and just experiencing the magic of that. And when I was with my dad when he died, and feeling my hand on his chest and feeling his last heartbeat and the final breath leave his body, and just being there in that transitional moment, the reflection I walked away with was, wow, birth and death are basically the same thing, just completely different. And
Yeah.
there's a magic to the coming and going of a soul through a body. And my reflection of that is what led me to learning that death doulas were a thing. At that point, I didn't know. And there have been two times in my life where I felt a calling to any type of work. The first was when I learned what a birth doula was, and the second was when I learned what a death doula was. So very quickly, a death doula is essentially a birth doula, but at the end of life. So it's non-medical support, companion, advocate for a person who's dying and their circle of care. So it's providing comfort. It's providing the opportunity for the person who is dying to tell their story, to be witnessed in the grief that they're experiencing, have the opportunity to try and process anything that's unfinished in the time that they have left. We don't always get to wrap up cleanly. So that's not necessarily the goal, but just to offer that as an opportunity without judgment, with full compassion, with just, endless runway for a person to say what they need to say. There's a lot of education and guidance in terms of end of life options and support and things like that. So that's very high level the work in a death doula. So when I learned what a death doula was after my dad died, I had this moment where I was like, I want to be a CFP death doula. I have no idea what that means. I don't know how to do that, but that's what I want to do. I want to work at the intersection of death and money. And so it took me about 3.5 years to figure out how to do it. And the beginning of 2025 was really kind of the birth process of this business. And so now, with this official launch coming up on what would have been my dad's 65th birthday, the reason why this has all come to be in the first place is I'll be working with people in Colorado who are in their 40s and 50s who have been diagnosed with a life limiting illness or a potentially life limiting illness and help support them through the financial, logistical, emotional, and existential challenges of dying too soon and everything that that entails. So, my work is I am technically an RIA because being a CFP, holding myself out for advice is part CYA, part just giving myself more room to work with people.
Sure.
But I'm structured a lot more like a coach. I don't
Mm.
manage assets. I don't do long-term planning for people. I'm really there to support people through this really critical transitional time. Foreshadowing to what we're going to talk about today, the bulk of it is supporting clients in acute crisis. It's helping people stabilize after a diagnosis. It's helping people adjust to the new reality that they have just been dealt. And also, in the case of a potentially life limiting diagnosis, mostly cancer, are we going to survive it or are we not? But living with this excruciating uncertainty for an indefinite period of time and not knowing what the outcome is going to be. So, really helping support that and helping to support other advisors through that as well. Because financial advisors, financial planners, we're all just humans. And as humans, many of us are really not comfortable going into that very tender, vulnerable, scary space that kind of forces us to confront our own mortality while we're helping somebody confront their own. So my work is as much with the person with the diagnosis as it is to support financial advisors who have younger clients who are going through this transition.
What a beautiful story. I'm very, very touched. And if I probably sat here with it a little bit longer, would probably tear up, myself. And so I have to, in some ways, kind of keep my composure a little, a little bit because there's just so many, and collaborative. The word thread is sitting kind of with me right now. Just so many like wonderful, beautiful threads there, and I just think about how needed like that type of person is, especially in financial planning. For those of you listening, being a therapist, like working in the trenches of discomfort, of trauma, of hurt, of healing, there is a certain, like that is very comfortable. But I do think that that is very different than working and sitting with someone who is looking at their life ending.
Mhm.
And, that just takes an incredibly like special person there. And I'm grateful that you exist, and are excited about that. I've always said, like, I will sit with anyone in their feelings unless it's around like their own mortality.
Yeah.
That is just not my lane where I'm comfortable. I'll share some of that. My grandmother passed away. It's probably been 12 years now. My daughter was very, very young. And I remember sitting in her room, her bedroom, and, getting the call like, hey, your grandma's going to pass, and like driving the 3 hours to Charleston, South Carolina,
Mhm.
to say goodbye, those final wishes, and sitting with her in the bedroom and like holding her hand as she, took her last breath. And also not knowing, very aware of the fact that I didn't know what to do. Like, this is hard. She couldn't process anything. And part of me is grateful for that because I think I would have just like, I don't know. I don't know what I would have done. But I will tell you the only thing that I do remember being able to do is to sing, to her. And that was about as much as I could give. I think of myself, and not that that is nothing, but I just remember that experience, and even like clinically walking away from that kind of later of like, this is not, I'm not gifted in this area.
Mhm.
I am not gifted. And so I share that only because just to say, I guess I have so much respect, and kind of in awe at anyone who can really sit with someone at that intersection, there around death, but then also working through the financial like logistics too.
Yeah.
Like, oh my goodness, what an amazing What an amazing story, Rose. I'm gonna take a breath. I'm so excited to have you here and to talk all about this. Okay, let's. I'm gonna pull back a little bit and put my podcast host hat on. Get the job done here. I feel like someone needs to be like kind of behind me, like going like, "Get it together, man!" like, because I
We
don't.
always have the opportunity, multi-part conversations here if you want to go into anything else.
Yes, oh,
Yeah.
Lord. I feel like I might need to. Okay, let's talk about supporting clients through acute crisis. Now, you talked about kind of end of life stuff. I guess maybe let's start with you did this a little bit, and maybe we can put a little bit more definition to like how do you define acute crisis?
Yeah, thank you. So acute crisis is to answer that, I'm going to reference something else real quick. So my one of my certifications is the certified financial transitionist. And in the financial transition work, one of the frameworks that we use is a 4 stages of transition model that includes anticipation of a change that's coming, like anticipation of retirement, anticipation of a death, anticipation of a birth, whatever. Then there's the event that happens, and that's considered an ending because what was is no longer, and we have ended that, and we're now at the very beginning of beginning what's coming next. And then we move into a passage phase where we're kind of integrating that change and working through all of that towards a new normal, and that's the 4th stage. So I give that 4 stage model that comes from the Financial Transition Institute because acute crisis, at its most basic definition, is the process of transition without anticipation. We are thrust into major life change without asking for it, without seeing it coming. It's kind of like the T-bone event in life. So it's sudden onset, little to no anticipation. There's often the perception of a loss of control, and that can feel very threatening. So there's often a heightened nervous system response of extreme stress, potentially a trauma response to what's happening, depending on how it is perceived by the person. The event itself is typically pretty time limited, but it's extraordinarily intense as well. It kind of overwhelms our capacity to handle what's coming at us. With that, it disrupts our normal functioning, and it just demands immediate attention. It's kind of like a 5 alarm fire. Just everything else fades away. This becomes the 24/7 thing that we are dealing with. So that's how I'm defining acute crisis. And an important thing to understand about it is that it can be both an external event or an internal event. So the external would be like the sudden death of a loved one. An internal one can be a crisis of faith, like that. Some people experience this moment where they're like, I think God is dead, or, whatever it might
Right.
be. And all of a sudden, everything that they've known and understood about life is kind of over. So it can be internal, external. It can also be positive or negative. And again, those are very subjective definitions, but just to give some examples and to understand as a planner, the importance of knowing whether the client and mostly their community of care, their circle of support, is perceiving the event as positive or negative, has implications. Negative events would be things like the unexpected death of a loved one, a surprise divorce, a sudden lawsuit, reputational damage online, something like that, a mass violence incident, being witness or victim in an event like that, a significant property loss, a natural disaster. Those are all examples. When we're in an acute crisis event that's negative, the benefit of that, which I say very loosely, is that there comes with a lot of benefit of the doubt socially, because people will be able to see the person who's experiencing that and go, "Ooh, that's a bad thing. Let's show up with casserole. Let's show up with cards. Let's show up to help with child support. Let's give them a place to live. Let's show up." So there's typically like the community will circle the wagons to help that person. Whereas it's an acute crisis, the sudden event that we don't see coming that's perceived as positive, like a sudden windfall of money, acceptance into a prestigious program, viral fame, all of a sudden, like that overnight success, maybe reconciliation with a loved one, these are all positive things. There's less social benefit of the doubt to
Mm.
those acute crisis positive events. So the person who's experiencing the sudden windfall of money, let's take that as an example, are less likely to get sympathy when they're feeling identity crisis because their circle of care might be like, "You just came into a couple $1 million."
Like, what do you mean you're
Yeah.
struggling? What do you mean this is hard?
What's the
Yeah.
problem here? Yeah. And so there's the potential for loneliness in a positive sudden event like that versus a negative one. So that's just an important thing for advisors to know. And a lot of it is in the perception of the person who's experiencing it. So that's where
I
I'm
think,
coming from.
yeah, I like that you distinguish like the internal and external. That makes a lot of sense. I think sometimes we hear the word crisis and we assume it's negative, but receiving a windfall, I think that there are probably a lot of advisors who have experienced that kind of client interaction, sale of business, an inheritance, what have you. And those might be positive, but they can also create some crisis,
Yeah,
kind of there. And some of it might be planning on the financial side, some of it could be more on the, psychological side of things. But it can just culminate in just kind of this really, I'll say messy.
mm,
It can just be a little messy and complicated there.
exactly.
Tell me a little bit about, from as a financial planner and even, your work with being a financial transitionist here. Like what is kind of that role there for like the advisor? Client is experiencing an acute crisis. I mean, they might bring a casserole. They might. That's
Mhm.
okay, but like what is their role in terms of working with the client? How do they show up? Maybe this is a loaded question. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think the way that I visualize it in my own mind is sort of the role that I have is to create like this shield bubble around the clients to try and buffer the client from unnecessary decision making, from predatory actions upon that person. Because the person who's going through that acute crisis, whether it's a positive, negative, internal, external, it's a really vulnerable place to be in. And there's a lot of people coming at them with a lot of opinions about how they
Mm,
should be doing things. And there can be a lot of pressure to make decisions quickly that the person may or may not be ready to make because their system may or may not be regulated enough to make a rapid decision. So the advisor's role is like, I almost see it like dropping a force field around the client to try and just create space where that client doesn't have to make decisions, where they have the opportunity to define what their boundaries are, to create statements that say things like, yes, I believe that your nonprofit is incredibly important and I would like to consider making a gift, but I'm not ready yet. So preparing them with statements that help set and hold boundaries to give them that space and helping make sure that they are not being taken advantage of in any way, shape, or
mm.
form by family or external factors.
I just think about like the decision fatigue and like overload mentally, like emotionally. What I guess I'd be curious, like, how do you explain that then to clients who they call in and they're like, oh, Rose, like my husband just got this diagnosis
Mhm,
and that we need to talk. We need to, or hey, like the business is selling and we're getting a $5 million check and my in-laws found out and my wife, she went and ran and tell all of the town. I guess how do advisors kind of explain or start saying like from a script standpoint, like, hey, this is my role. How would you coach them?
that's a great question. I think creating the space for the client to come in and to share everything that's going on. First and foremost, the advisor to really connect with where the client is and how they're perceiving what's going on.
Hmm.
Because we, again, are just an external person who is watching somebody go through this crisis event. So, us tuning in first and foremost to how that person's experiencing the event and how grounded they are or dysregulated they are is first step. And that's just a series of open-ended conversations. And our friend Meg Lartz is just brilliant at having questions with that. But do you talk at all on your podcast about like trauma awareness and
Yeah, we've had actually several guests come on to talk about Rakim Sabri around trauma, financial trauma. It's certainly been kind of woven in to in a lot of other ways. So, yes, we do and have talked about trauma. What we should start with, you talked about step one
Mhm,
is like, what are the steps here for supporting a client who is in acute crisis? So they call and they share the news,
mhm,
albeit positive, albeit negative. Like, I guess step one, you said, is kind of creating that space there with them, that connection, that validation,
mhm.
the support. Like maybe what are the other steps? Walk us through maybe how you might do that if we can think about it. Maybe in a steps way. I don't know. That's easy for how my brain is
Yeah,
conceptualizing this.
yeah. I think the first is the assessment of understanding where they're coming from and how they're perceiving it. So what type of behaviors are you seeing them practice, what type of words are they using to describe their situation. So things that would indicate that they are in struggle with what's going on and that we might need to have more proactive role in helping with that protection piece is looking for sudden and pronounced changes. So from how we know our client to be on a regular business as usual basis, any shift away from that would be an indication. Looking for things like overwhelm and disorganization, intense emotional distress. So, like responses that do not match the situation, whatever that
Yeah.
response may be,
Yeah.
impaired decision making, physical signs of stress, which again, here's, the art of listening with more than just our ears. But, are we seeing clients who are sort of slumped back like this, or just, they weigh 1,000 pounds in front of you, or are they like just tense and tight and fidgety and they've got this nervous energy? Like, what is their body physically doing in front of you? And how are they talking about time? How is their perception of time? Often when somebody's in acute crisis, there's a sense of urgency.
Yeah.
Everything has to be done all at once. So really keying into those, the more of those distress signals that you see, the more important it is to then work towards regulating that client and being the calm in the room that helps bring them back to presence. Borrowing from trauma work, orientation and grounding is
Hmm.
one of the most critical things. And there's a lot of really simple tools to that. One of my favorite is called 54321. Are you familiar with this one?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, quick description for listeners who are not familiar with it, but it's asking the client to describe 5 things that they can see around them, 4 things that they can touch, which could be, I can touch this water bottle. It can be, I can feel the weight of my body sitting on the chair. I can feel the warmth of my cat in my lap, the sensation of touch. 3 things that they can hear, 2 things that they can smell, and 1 thing that they can taste. And so just tuning into the senses helps bring somebody back to here and now. That's one very quick activity to working with somebody who's showing these signs of distress. Another one is just really simple breath work, which can be introduced with, it looks to me like you're really stressed. I'm noticing your shoulders raised and your fists clenched and your hands shaking. Can we just take a couple deep breaths together? Because this is big stuff that's happening in your life. And just taking a couple deep breaths. It doesn't have to be anything big or fancy. But one thing I want to say with that too, that's really important is asking for consent with it. So before introducing any of these, because one of the things that's gone in acute crisis is a sense of agency. It's a lack of control. So asking for consent is a way of giving back agency in a tiny little bite. And that's a really important step for helping somebody regulate. So, Ashley, would it be okay if we did a quick little exercise to just come into now and kind of calm our nervous systems together? And asking for permission, doing it as a co event, something together. It's not the client doing it. There's nothing wrong with the client. We're doing it together. So those are important elements there. So that would really be like step 1 and 2, probably. 1 is just the noticing. Are we in distress? How are they experiencing this? 2 is helping them land
Hmm.
back. And then the third is really where the art to this work comes into play, of then connecting with the client and deciding what comes next. But we know, because we're not in crisis, that in most circumstances, there's really maybe only 2 or 3 things that actually have to happen quickly. Almost everything else can wait. So one of the tools that comes from the Financial Transition Institute is called Now, Soon, and Later. That's probably one of Susan Bradley's most famous tools. And the idea behind that, and it's such an effective tool, is to just ask the client to brain dump everything, whether or not it's related to money, just all the swirl that's happening with that sense of urgency and crisis and time distortion that they're experiencing. Get it out. And then work with them to break it out into here's what needs to happen now, because this is legitimately time sensitive and critical. Here's what needs to happen soon, but not now. And then here's what can happen later. We're going to keep track of it. We don't want to lose it, but it's not a top priority right now. So that helps to break down that swirl of the urgency into these bite-sized pieces that again gives a sense of control back to the individual and also makes it a lot more manageable to move forward. So from there, whatever shows up on the soon list, and that's going to be different for everybody, that's where we can actually start taking action. But there's a lot that happens before we start taking any action from a, traditional planning sense.
Sure. Yeah. I like and appreciate that you talked about just the consent piece and willingness. That's something that I am very big on, making sure that from a permission standpoint, like there is that buy in.
Hmm.
And it is so because we want clients to feel like they have a sense of agency, whether they're in crisis or, not. Like that is just
Hmm.
incredibly important when it comes to decision making and certainly financial decision making. But I liked this breakdown of the now, soon, and later because you're right. Like when clients are in a state of crisis, there is that urgency piece. And I think advisors, if they will sit back for just a moment and just think about the last time they had a client come in where there was a crisis, albeit a positive one or even a
Hmm.
negative one, they might you might recall that client did feel like, well, we got to get this done now, and if we can get this done this week or like today, and like how soon can we make this happen, and well, if we just move this and like just did this, then there's all of these like strategies, and I just validate like, hey, that is normal. Like that sense of urgency is there, but that is such a great sign for then taking that and going, hey, it seems and it feels like this is really big. And that makes a lot of sense to me. And I wonder, could we take a moment to, as you said, Rose, like brain dump just all of the things that are swirling around like in your head and like, I love that Susan Bradley exercise of the now, soon, like later. And I would imagine maybe kind of through that exercise, or that might be the point where, I don't know, you can tell me, like, then for the advisor, they can suggest, offer even like, hey, this is like where my role can be kind of in this is to help you with some of these things along the way, or making sure we stay on track with like the now, sooner or later. Am I
Yes.
getting that right, Rose?
Yep.
Okay.
100%. Yeah. The financial planner really becomes the keeper of that list.
uh,
That's one thing that we can do to help them to say, you don't have to carry this alone. You don't have to remember. When you think of more stuff, send it to me and I will keep track of it for you. So we're going to be partners in this together. And another thing that should shift as you're working with a client in acute crisis is the pacing of meetings. Generally speaking, because they're in a state of overwhelm, and even if and when you bring them back to a grounded spot in that moment, it's still this five-alarm fire that's happening. So it's going to be potentially days or weeks or maybe even a couple months until the urgency has fully passed. So knowing that you're going to have to bring them back to that moment of calm over and over again, keeping meetings shorter and more frequent during that time because there's less cognitive capacity.
oh, that's a
There's
great point.
yeah, there's just less energy to see things through because they're being pulled in a million different directions. So keeping that now, soon, and later list and updating it over time, like making new versions of it, and periodically, say maybe a month into it after meeting, maybe for 20 minutes every week for a few weeks, being able to show them the first list that you were working with and the list that you're with now. And like, we're making progress. We're getting there. This stuff has moved off the now list. We're shifting things up from soon to now. So it's okay. We're doing it. And that slowing things down is part of that like protective shield bubble that we put around the client.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Slow
I'm
down.
glad you mentioned that. That I was gonna kind of tie that back into like, I wonder if that is kind of what we talked about earlier, right? That shield, that
Yep.
protective bubble,
Yep.
right? Is saying we have this list, I'll say, right? And like we're gonna slow it down. And I love the language there. I'll be the keeper of the list, and you know, anything like I'll make sure that we kind of stay on track. That makes a lot of sense to me. Presentations that I've given before is on sensitive conversations. And
Hmm.
so it might be like crisis, types of conversations, events, what have you, some of them that you mentioned earlier. But sensitive just being subjective, it can mean a lot of different things. And one of the things that I have found, and I talk about in this presentation, is that sometimes we leave that conversation and it's like handled that so great. Like we kind of have this plan of like now, soon, later, and like end it, in the meeting with like, okay, like, well, let me know if you need anything. And they almost put like the onus back on the client to bring things back up. And I'd love to hear your take on this. So I have some thoughts. Some takes on it. But when like a client is in a crisis, after they kind of the advisor gets through like maybe this initial like meeting, you talked about kind of meeting cadence there, but
Hmm.
what else is important for an advisor to be doing after kind of the initial, I'll say, unleashing of what's happening?
Yeah. You touched on it there. It's making agreements together and really important thing you said too is not putting the onus back on the client, because I know in my own personal experience, and I definitely have witnessed this from many others going through these types of sudden events, is that very well meaning people will say, "What do you need? I'm here to help. I got you. What can I do?" The feeling when somebody's in overwhelm is like, I have no idea. I don't know what I need. I am so overwhelmed. I don't have the capacity to answer that question. Um, this is for the advisor, but also just as a human, understanding that when somebody's in crisis, it's really helpful to offer a menu to them. So I don't really know what to do. I don't know what you need, but do you have enough food? I'd be happy to stop by with something to throw in your freezer. Can I watch your kids for a little while, or can I help with pickup from school for the next couple of weeks? Would it be useful if I sent over my son to do some yard work? You know, winter's coming. You're probably not paying attention to leaves right now, but would that be helpful? Or he could walk your dog. So just menu some options. And that gives the person who's overwhelmed to be like, actually, yeah, somebody to walk my dog every day would be such a massive help right now. It didn't even occur to me to think of that, or that I was allowed to ask for something so simple and helpful. So menuing options is good. At the end of a meeting, coming up with agreements for next steps and limiting it to one, two, or maximum three
Yeah.
agreements for what the next steps are is also a really important piece there as well. Because again, we just want to keep it so bite sized, and having something visual and written for them to take in their hands with them in that moment, not email, in their hands that they can fold and keep in their pocket, put on their refrigerator, just physical, tangible, do this one thing between now and when we meet in a week.
Yeah, I want to call it an aftercare plan. It's not, this is where my medical, like mental health brain is getting like confused here, um, from a language standpoint. But yeah, that kind of like after meeting, like
Hmm.
action plan there and taking kind of the reins, maybe a little bit more.
Hmm.
And I love the menu piece too. Like, hey, here are some options for how I can support you or would love to be able to support you. And I guess maybe what I would add to that is, I do encourage advisors to, especially after the initial disclosure of maybe an acute event, is to within like 24 hours, like
Hmm.
respond,
Hmm.
albeit, a phone call,
Hmm.
an email or a text, but to communicate at least within 24 hours and thank the client for sharing that. There's, one, just it takes a lot of courage. There's some vulnerability, as you kind of mentioned it. And I think to be able to thank them and say, I'm so glad that you shared that with me. It means a lot that you would trust me with that during this time. Honored to like help you, walk alongside you, through this, however you want to like wordsmith it. I think
Hmm.
it's just important kind of within a very short time frame to acknowledge what they did and what is happening as well. And you never know. Like I've had sometimes like a few advisors say, yeah, like when I did that like 24-hour check-in or check back in, like then the client was like, hey, actually, you know what? After I kind of like settled in, like I thought about this. Could
Yeah.
you help me, with this? Or we need to make sure that we check on this. And so I think it can result maybe even in the client after they're a little more settled, like being able to think through maybe something that they need. Maybe I do want a casserole, or hey, actually, I know I told you to bring a casserole, but I hate casseroles.
Yeah.
Can you just send like Papa John's pizza like instead? I don't know. um, I think I echo everything that you shared there. The menu is so great. I'm going to use that as a takeaway just in my own personal life, because I'm guilty of that too. Of like, hey, let me know what you need. Like well intentioned, but also coming from a bit of just um yeah, maybe just my own discomfort, wanting to help but not knowing how. And so I think a menu is really just brilliant, really brilliant.
Yeah, and it's empowering on both sides, because one of the common characteristics in an event like this is a feeling of helplessness.
Yeah.
And it's an incredibly disempowering affect to have, as helplessness. And most of us find helplessness intolerable.
Oh
And
yeah.
we want to jump in and we want to fix. And so often when somebody's in crisis, we don't need fixes. We just need time. We need space. We need calm. So offering a menu for the person who's offering it, it helps to ameliorate that sense of helplessness. And it also is empowering for the person to say, I don't know what I can do here, but here are some skills and
Yeah.
talents and resources that I have that I'm willing to offer you. If there's a move involved, I can give you 3 hours of my time in a truck and I can strong back, I'm ready to schlep, whatever the case may be. Or if you need a thinking partner to think through these life insurance death benefit options, I'm more than happy to talk through those things with you. So it's empowering for the person who's offering it, who often feels helpless and has a desire to fix, but it's not thrusting a solution on anybody who
Right.
may not be ready for solutions or even need a solution. One other thing that I want to say about kind of the aftercare plan,
Yeah.
we'll just go with that.
You know what? I love that you said thank you for that validation, Rose. We're just gonna go with it. It's an
We're running
aftercare
with it.
plan.
We're working.
Yeah, yeah.
Is for the financial advisor to unwaveringly hold their client in high regard because they are going to behave in ways that are not typical for how they typically behave. They may come into the office swinging someday, just combative, angry, irritable. It's not their normal, but they are just not their best selves in this moment. Extending benefit of the doubt and holding them in high regard through all of this. And, if there is a combativeness or something like that, there's appropriate boundaries, but not to throw them out because they're going through a difficult moment. And recognizing that, you made these agreements last time about here's the one thing that we're going to do between when we meet next time. They may not do that thing. Do not get upset with them. Just go back and meet them where they are the next time and continue moving forward in steps. There's no predictable path here, and people are going to behave in unpredictable ways that are out of character with how they normally show up. And it is our job to let them be a mess
Yeah.
without trying to fix it and to just
Yeah.
continue to respect them and extend them benefit of the doubt. And that's a really hard thing to do for a lot of us. I know as a planner, I have certainly felt frustration with certain clients who are just not making progress, or I see something that I believe is urgent and needs to be dealt with right away that they're just not ready to deal with yet. It is not my responsibility to feel anxious on their behalf. My responsibility is to just help continue to support that to happen at the time frame that they are capable of doing it.
Yeah. I love that you mentioned that around just holding them in high regard and just understanding that they might be acting and responding in atypical ways. And that process, especially if we're talking, I think about things like divorce and like death, that may not be like one or two meetings. Like that could be months, it could be a year.
Yes,
And so there's just this understanding that for some clients, they might move things up sooner than others,
correct.
but just keeping in mind, like, hey, they're going through something. And obviously, with appropriate boundaries,
Hmm.
my job is to support them. And I'm just curious, like, when an advisor maybe should bring somebody like you in. If it's like, okay, like client terminal illness, like I am way out of my depth. Maybe I don't understand how to help them. Maybe I recognize they need a lot of touches, like
Hmm.
just personal like touches that I'm not able to give them that. Like when maybe should somebody, an advisor, like bring you in to help support a client who is in crisis?
Yeah, thank you. All of those triggers that you just mentioned are great. So, any advisor who, like you, can identify like death is not my zone. I don't feel comfortable talking about. I don't even like the word, and I definitely don't know how to support somebody in that. And after, shoving the box of Kleenexes across the desk, I don't really know what to do. And I've got a couple platitudes up my sleeve, but beyond that, I'm not sure. So the discomfort, any advisor who's really discomfort with the diagnosis, the end of life, things like that, that would be a time to give me a call. When a client's behavior has shifted significantly in the ways that we've been talking about, and the advisor's having a really hard time connecting with that person, and also I think you said it, that doesn't have the capacity to do that. That's another good example. I sometimes think of myself kind of like the fireman that runs into the burning building. And that's not what all financial planners want to do or have time to do or training to do.
Sure.
So if an advisor gets to the point where they feel like this building is on fire and I really want to help, but I have no idea how, I'm the fireman that they can call to
Yeah.
run into the burning building. So those would be a couple examples. And the other piece is because my business structure is a little bit more like a coaching structure than it is traditional planning. So my engagement agreement is 16 sessions, which typically happen over about 16 weeks. So it's
Okay.
approximately 4 months. They can renew that agreement as often as they want to, but it's a weekly 75-minute session. So that's a lot and the reason it's that long, I said earlier, like have more frequent, shorter meetings. The reason why mine are longer is to give space for more of the qualitative. Like they're very discovery based conversations to allow people time to explore the cognitive and emotional and even spiritual sides of what's going on for them.
Yeah.
And that type of time commitment is something that a lot of advisors don't have,
Yeah.
particularly if they've got multiple clients who are going through a crisis simultaneously. So that's also something that I can offer clients who are just needing time to talk about what's going on. And an advisor doesn't have the capacity to do that, either logistically or
Sure.
emotionally themselves, to hold
Emotionally,
that
yeah. Like
space. Yeah.
if they're like me and they're like,
Yeah.
oh, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And I appreciate you explaining a little bit of that structure in terms of how it might look, right? Because, I could just see an advisor being like, well, that sounds interesting, but like, what does that look like? So thank
Yeah.
you for answering that question. Rose, as our time winds down here, is there anything else when it comes to, and I'm sure there probably is, a lot of other things that we didn't get to touch on, but is there anything as far as supporting clients through acute crisis that you feel like is important for advisors to know today, at least in this conversation?
So much. I'm pausing because I'm like, there's a list in my head, and how do I fit this into a minute or two? One thing that comes to mind, and it sounds like this is something that you touch on, but it would be to the extent that you have the capacity to invest in trauma awareness and trauma literacy, and also grief awareness and grief literacy, to understand these two things as physiological experiences that have cognitive and behavioral implications. So for advisors to invest in learning about trauma, learning about grief, understanding at least conceptually what they are, what they look like on people, and then even taking it a step further to even learn the basics of how to be with somebody who is experiencing an acute crisis as traumatic. All acute crisis is going to have grief involved because it's typically a sudden ending to how things used to be. There's just grief there. So that would be one thing. The other thing I would say is really important is to become extremely aware of the language that you use. Because when a client is struggling in this way, words can significantly help or hinder the experience that they're having. And because culturally we don't have a lot of room for death and grief and loss and trauma in just our normal conversations. It's something that it's kind of fringe. We only talk about with therapists or just a few trusted friends, but it's not dinner table conversation. None of us really learn how to talk about that. So we learn things like, in the case of a death, saying something like, I'm sorry for your loss. That's a platitude that we all go to. That might not be particularly helpful. Or, I've heard people say who've had a child death say, well, at least you're still young, you can have more kids. Any sentence that starts with at least, and you try and like silver lining of a
Oh yeah.
situation, just delete that from your
Yeah.
lexicon, period.
Yeah.
Or
Yes.
just stop it. If you start to catch it out of your mouth, just abort mission and pivot to something else. Just at least whatever, don't do that.
Yeah.
One book I would offer, which is also a fantastic audiobook, is called There's No Good Card for This. And I think the subtitle is what to say to people, really good people who experience really bad things, or something along those lines. But that's an extraordinarily helpful book and frame of reference for gaining this awareness about your language and how you show up, and like things that you just need to scrape completely from what you say to people who are in struggle, and other helpful ways of showing up. So
Yeah.
those,
I
yeah.
love that you mentioned that the language piece, and I laugh because I reference this person as my girl. However, I should be clear that I have never met this person and I'm really just more of a fangirl, but my girl Brene Brown,
Yeah.
who I wish we were friends. I wish we were besties. She has a fantastic, I'm just gonna put it out there. I also feel like I should be honest in that, like, we're not friends. I just want to manifest that, I guess. Maybe we will be if I keep saying it. But she has a fantastic video. I've utilized it for training around the difference between empathy versus sympathy. And I laugh
Yeah.
because she uses that phrase at least,
Yeah.
and how, while the intention is, I think, to be helpful, like it is incredibly hurtful, on the receiving end of that. So language is very powerful, very,
Yes.
very powerful. For those of you that are listening, If you want to learn a little bit more, hear a little bit more about grief or about trauma, financial trauma, you can go back and listen to episode 23 with Rakim Sabri, where we talk about trauma, financial trauma. Even episode 24, they're back to back with Kathy Balasek, where we talk about grief literacy. So those are also just great episodes, throwing those out there for you to reference, in addition to the resources that Rose mentioned as well. Well, Rose, as our time sadly comes to an end, if people want more Rose in their life, if they're like, this sounds really interesting and they'd love to have you in their corner as a resource, where can they find you?
Yeah, thank you. My website is deathandmoney.com. Just calling it exactly what it is, deathandmoney.com. And I'm also on LinkedIn Golden Thread Collaborative as well. And
I love that.
I have a newsletter called Threads of Insight. If you liked the threads, that's the
I
newsletter.
did. Yeah.
So, going to the website, signing up for the newsletter is another way to stay in touch. I do it twice a month. One issue is just quick little blurbs, kind of factual related to money, death and money related topics, as well as meaning. There's a lot of poetry there as well, because poetry is such a beautiful translator for the difficult things that we're struggling to integrate and experience. Poetry it's kind of the spoonful of sugar that helps us get through all of the stuff that we're doing. And then the second newsletter I do every month is kind of a long form essay and just a platform for me to be able to offer reflections on things that I'm thinking about, insights that I have, the work that I'm doing, solutions that I see or would like to see exist in the world. So those are also good
I
ways to
love
stay in
that. We'll
touch.
make sure that we include that additionally in the show notes as well. And for those of you listening, thank you so much for tuning in today and allowing Rose and I into your ears and into your mind. If this conversation resonated with you, I'd love to keep the connection going, as I'm sure Rose would as well. And we talked about where you can find her. You can find me on LinkedIn at Ashley Kwame, where I share weekly insights on the human side of planning and conversations, topics, things such as this. But if you'd like a little bit more Ashley Kwame, if you'd like a little bit more of Beyond the Plan, you can check us out at our website and sign up for our monthly newsletter, where both Meg and I will write content and put out great information, helpful for you as the advisor, but also for your clients as well. Make sure, though, most importantly, make sure to follow the show so that you never miss a future conversation like this one. And as always, my friends, I hope that you remember, I hope that you hold on to this. Finances don't have feelings, but your clients do. Until next time, keep planning, keep growing, and keep going beyond.